in a bad spot in chains, imprisoned, because she hadn't been fast enough. Her mission had been mostly a failure. She merely had to find an ancient artifact before this dark witch could, its power far too great for the likes of Catrafia to wield. The ever-flirting, free-spirited, though malevolent spellcaster had said out loud what her intents were when she'd get her hands on the Lamp of 1,000 Temptations, an object of might which had been used in the past for both nefarious and sublime deeds. As a heroine, it was Louise's duty to go forth and find it before her along with her party of other heroines, but they failed. She could picture it now, Castrafia enchanting, ensorceling, mesmerizing, hypnotizing the others into becoming her slaves, part of her growing harem of female adventurers of all kinds, each on their knees, a smile on their lips, dressed like exotic maidens and dancers for her pleasure, and yet somehow she had sparred Louise. Of course, sparred was perhaps a generous term, as indeed she had not been harmed and neither had she changed, yet she was chained in her cell, held very close to the wall opposite to the door and bars with cuffs on her wrists and ankles, with one singular item out of arm's reach. The lamp itself. It was a cruel situation, certainly not out of character for Castrafia, who rejoiced in torment and teasing. Their rivalry full of such moments, when she'd playfully make lewd comments on Louise, flirting and threats ever being balanced in their interaction, even with the former, was really just one-sided. The depravity of the witch had always been something she felt was weird, and yet, now that Louise was at her mercy, for the moment anyway, Castrafia did not even do anything to take advantage of the situation. Something was up, yet what? She looked at the lamp, the sole item of interest, as the objective of her important quest. If she could get her hands on it, perhaps it might even save her, though for no lack of trying she simply couldn't reach it. The length of her chains had been calculated, and the only thing that Louise could actually do was stare at the, admittedly, sumptuous artifact. It was an oil lamp, one made of gold in its base, spout, and on every inches of its grafted appearance, yet there were also gems on the side which were ever-changing. Rubies, sapphires, emeralds, amethysts, opals, obsidian stones, diamonds. She had difficulties identifying it all, as they popped up and created bizarre patterns, the cavalcade of sparkling, glimmering colors and rainbows of intriguing appeal. Part of Louise felt happy watching it, yet another one entirely was wary, as the few legends she heard about this object were of how people could be tested upon acquiring it. It was called, after all, the Lamp of 1,000 Temptations, yet as much as she tried to slip her hands and wrists out of her cuffs, a task that still wasn't met with success, her own eyes kept on being distracted by the lamp standing but a few meters away from her. On the cold stone floor, it was the only thing which seemed to radiate light and warmth, opulence and beauty, and it was certainly difficult not to notice it. She wanted to stare at it, to observe the lamp, as if it was trying to send a message to her in some ethereal language, but she snapped out of it, shaking her head, as she tried to move the chains by force, an ultimately pointless endeavor, yet one she felt she had to try again and again, no matter how many attempts, until success would be hers. This caused her to be tired, for fatigue, hunger and thirst to be even more preeminent in her body, as she had been basically thrown into the cell, possibly to rot there, if the lack of visits were anything to go by. No Castrafia that came to gloat, none of her companions to give her food, but also misery in how they had been corrupted and brainwashed, nothing. It was a touch painful, both physically and mentally, yet there was one escape from this, something that Louise found out by accident, and that was staring at the lamp of 1,000 temptation. It was so round, curved, sculpted in gold that possessed a sheen unlike any piece of art, more precious than gems, prettier still than all that Louise had ever witnessed. The patterns went in all directions, wherever became some kind of Ouroboros, a self-absorbing loop which created something very easy to stare at, to appreciate. The gold made the gemstones radiate in their light even more, the singular torch in the cell burning its fiery image onto the surface of the object, as her eyes glued themselves upon it. There was a mystical allure to the simplest of things, an oil lamp whose power was so great that it was desired by many, yet now it was in the hands of Castrafi, but still so close. As cruel as it was, there was comfort in locking her gaze upon the lamp, making Louise temporarily forget herself. For but a moment there was no need for food, no fear, no anger, no pain. Just a unique sensation of peace that Louise certainly couldn't get enough of. The gold seemed so much more precious, the gemstones so better looking with each passing moment, as she lost track of time for one, or perhaps a few, minutes. The temptation was upon her, the idea to just gaze and succumb to this tranquility being good and yet terrible also. She began to realize that perhaps this was the trick all along, that the lamp was there to break her spirit and claim her in a slow burn, in a way which would ensure that she'd be fully aware of what was going on and what would happen. She bit her lower lip and turned her gaze in another direction, an act which took much more effort than she ever thought possible. The dull gray of the stone wall was certainly not as interesting, its frigid and boring appearance no boon to her spirit and soul like the lamp was. She could still see a phantom pattern in the corner of her eyes, an invitation that her mind conjured for her to just move her neck a little, to return to something more pleasant. The image of the lamp itself seemed imprinted within her psyche, symbolizing temptation and warmth, an escape to her trouble, even if ephemeral. It was, all in all, dooming herself to continue looking, as she gathered her strength, her willpower to deny this, and yet the simple concept of the lamp did not go away, as if burned within her thoughts. Louise knew not how long she managed to resist, to rebel, and yet it was not enough, as still no one came to taunt her, to interact with her in any form. Isolation and the loss of how long she had been here gave way to further lack of control, of restraint on her part, and thus her head went on to slowly but surely move on its own, and partake in the glory that was the lamp of 1,000 temptations. How it sparkled, how it brought her such bliss to simply observe its radiance, its divine nature, as Louise knew right there that she had lost that thought coursing through her brain for a few moments, until it was shut down completely. There really was nothing else to think about but the lamp, its superb aura and its power oh so clear by now. It gave way to contentment, to happiness, as her problems seemed to dissipate one by one. Her predicaments, what led to it, how she got there, and every single circumstance is washed away by gems and gold, swirls of such wonderful colors that they pulsated, beginning to coat everything away in their beauty. No gray stone, no cold temperature, no loneliness, neither pain or anguish, just the acceptance of this object, as its influence grew and Louise began to accept it. There was reluctance at first, fear of the unknown and of being unable to go back, yet the way forward which was silently promised to her seemed so good, so fantastic and filled with wonders that truly there was no other choice but to accept everything she had lost. But this defeat was no shame, No great regret, but instead liberation, the lamp imprinting itself even further inside her mind, as she felt not just ecstasy but arousal as well. She was falling for this divine artifact, for its power and what it could do, as she stared loving, worshipful eyes ogling that which she had sought for so long. No matter who found it first, so long as she could stare, and as the lamp continued its work, immobile yet not without any particular magic or intent, smoke began to escape from the tip of the spout, a further invitation toward the inescapable, toward the sublime, as Louise grinned in delight, her eyes long since showcasing spirals of gold and multiple colors, as by now she was the subject of this lamp and all its glory. The smoke, thick and sparkling, came in toward her as she took deep breaths, filling her lungs with mouthful and heavy inhaling of this offering, this promise of eternal salvation. It was a mixture of drinking, inhaling and eating the substance, the way it was light, somewhat bubbly but yet akin to mist, as it was gulped down with eagerness, bringing volcanic heat and changes within her flesh, muscles, bones and her thoughts. It covered everything, then seeped in by bringing in magic of the likes Louise would never be able to identify, as it colored the core of her character in all the precious shades and glimmers that mesmerized her so. She was feeling so empty yet fulfilled that her own body began not just to absorb the smoke, but to actually reverse it all, as it was that content escaping the lamp which absorbed her, turning her from solid to gas in a way that felt simply incredible. Her arousal peaking, she understood nothing, less that it felt great and that she simply had to submit now, the easiest of tasks to accomplish soon. Her wrists and ankles were freed, the chains no longer relevant, as the smoke returned inside the lamp bit by bit, taking her along. It was no tragedy, nothing to be afraid of, as instead she was eager, excited at the thought of being one with the lamp of 1,000 temptations. It felt like part of her journey was complete, ready to move on to the next step, as the suction made it seem like it was unavoidable. She had no choice on the matter, but she wasn't fooled into thinking of this as a catastrophe but rather as something liberating. Docile, submissive, she was a sharp contrast to who she had been once, yet it was all for the better, as by now she floated in the middle of the room and then was integrated into the artifact, swallowed and sucked in, as she could feel the lamp shine and accept her wholeheartedly, as barrage of information came within, discarding thoughts and knowledge for more useful acquisitions and skills to replace it all she would know of fighting, of what she went through and of what she had once been, but she would also understand that this was the past and her present could be assigned to a role, genie slave. She was bound to the lamp, accepted in its sacred role of subservience and as such magic, spells, wish-granting, servitude, devotion, loyalty, worship and other such concepts poured in, overwhelming her for a few instants, until they became the norm. And as this went on, a pair of hands took in the lamp and brought it up from the floor. And now you shall be mine forever, Louise, my prized and pretty rival. How I've waited for the longest time to finally claim you, and now you shall serve me for eternity. No longer blocking my path, you will facilitate everything for me, grant me pleasure and satisfaction with your every thoughts and actions. Louise listened, that voice belonging to the one she intrinsically knew how to name, Mistress. A rub of her receptacle and there she was, unleashed, dressed in a bedlock of the most risky and sensual qualities, bowing in reverence, a smile on her face and the desire to obey firmly rooted in her psyche. Then, she committed to her role once more, declaring a sacred and "O glorious mistress, I'm Louise, the genie of the lamp of 1,000 temptations. Your wishes are my commands, and I'm all too eager to hear and obey them."